What if the reason you wake up at 3 a.m. feeling like something's fundamentally wrong with your life isn't a midlife crisis? It's your childhood self trying to tell you something? What if those recurring nightmares about being trapped, chased, or powerless aren't random neural misfiring, but your authentic self screaming through the only channel it has left? Here's a thought experiment that might haunt you. If your 8-year-old self could see your life today, would they feel proud, confused, or heartbroken? Would they recognize the person you've become, or would they stare at you like a stranger wearing their face? Here's a disturbing reality that most people never connect. A 2015 study from Frontiers in Psychology found that preschoolers' dreams typically feature static images of animals and peaceful scenes, but they lack the complex social interactions and psychological distress that dominate adult dreams. Meanwhile, research on adult recurrent nightmares shows they're strongly associated with depression, anxiety, and feelings of powerlessness in waking life. Something happens between childhood and adulthood that transforms our sleeping minds from peaceful to tormented. But it's not just our literal sleeping dreams that change. It's our relationship with our deepest aspirations, our sense of what's possible, our connection to who we really are. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this transformation over a century before modern psychology caught up. He wrote, "In sleep and in dreams, we pass through the whole thought of earlier humanity." But he wasn't just talking about evolution. He was talking about the authentic self we've buried under layers of social conditioning. Most people live their entire lives as tenants in their own existence, never claiming ownership of their deepest dreams and desires. Nietzsche wasn't just another philosopher writing abstract theories. He experienced profound childhood trauma when his father died at age 4, and his prophetic childhood dreams of death later influenced both Freud and Jung, who wove his ideas directly into their psychological frameworks. When Nietzsche said our dreams contain the whole thought of earlier humanity, he meant something revolutionary. Our sleeping minds preserve every version of ourselves we've ever been, like archaeological layers in our unconscious. Your childhood dreams weren't naive fantasies. They were accurate readings of your core drives before society shaped them into acceptable forms. Consider Vincent van Gogh, who understood what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "Man is something that shall be overcome." Society rejected Van Gogh at every turn. His family called him a failure. Art critics dismissed his work as the ravings of a madman. But Van Gogh overcame society's definition of success to create something authentically his own. He died poor and unknown, but he died as himself, not as a shadow of what others expected him to be. Think about it this way. The child who dreamed of being a superhero wasn't necessarily destined to wear a cape, but they were expressing a fundamental drive toward heroism, justice, and making a positive impact. The child who dreamed of being an artist wasn't just being creative, they were revealing a core need for self-expression and beauty-making. The child who dreamed of being an explorer wasn't just adventurous, they were showing a deep hunger for discovery and growth. Nietzsche understood that authentic living means honoring these core drives, even when the specific childhood fantasy isn't literally achievable. He believed that most people live in psychological sleepwalking, going through the motions of socially acceptable lives while their authentic selves slowly suffocate. This creates what he called the fundamental tension of human existence, the gap between who we are and who we're capable of becoming. Our dreams, both sleeping and waking, become the battlefield where this tension plays out. Here's where modern psychology validates Nietzsche's insight in precise detail. Research on disturbing dreams in children shows that as kids face increased social pressure and academic demands, their dream content becomes progressively more negative and psychologically distressing. But this isn't just about external pressure, it's about internal adaptation. We don't just compare ourselves to the neighbors anymore. We compare ourselves to the top 0.1% of curated lives on Instagram, feeding endless dissatisfaction and pushing us further from our authentic selves. What would your life look like if you stopped living to please this imaginary audience in your mind? Consider how this happens in practice. A creative child learns that art doesn't pay well, so they pursue business instead. A naturally empathetic child learns that sensitivity is weakness, so they develop emotional armor. A curious child learns that questioning authority causes problems, so they become compliant. Each adaptation makes perfect sense individually. We're not talking about evil societal forces here. We're talking about the complex trade-offs between individual expression and collective functioning. The problem isn't that social norms exist, it's that we often accept them without questioning whether they serve our authentic development. The neuroscience behind this is disturbing. Studies show chronic suppression of authentic desires leads to higher cortisol levels, weakened immune response, and increased cardiovascular risk. Your body literally breaks down when you live a life that isn't yours. A 2020 study on authenticity and brain function found that when people act in ways that conflict with their core values, it creates measurable stress responses and reduces cognitive flexibility. Over time, this creates what psychologists call self-concept confusion. We become so identified with our social roles that we lose touch with our underlying nature. The accountant forgets they once loved music. The manager forgets they once wanted to help people. The lawyer forgets they once dreamed of healing. They become spectral versions of themselves, present but not truly alive in their own existence. This is where the nightmares begin. Not just in sleep, but in waking life. Your recurring dreams about being unprepared for work or missing an important exam aren't random. The nightmare where you show up to work unprepared, that's your mind telling you you're unprepared for the life you're living. These aren't prophecies of failure, they're metaphors for the roles you've outgrown. The nightmare of missing the flight, maybe it's not about travel, maybe it's about missing your chance to take off towards your real destination. Modern psychology has identified several key consequences of living inauthentically, and they align perfectly with what Nietzsche predicted. First, there's what researchers call counterfactual thinking, our tendency to imagine alternative versions of our lives. People who engage in excessive counterfactual thinking show higher rates of depression and anxiety. But Nietzsche would argue this isn't a psychological bug, it's a feature. It's your authentic self trying to communicate through the only channel it has left. Second, there's the phenomenon of meaning-making deficits. When we live in ways that conflict with our core values, we lose the ability to create genuine meaning in our lives. Everything feels hollow, mechanical, pointless. Nietzsche called this nihilism, not just the absence of belief in God, but the absence of any transcendent vision of human possibility. Third, there's the epidemic of what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, the tendency for increased income, status, or material comfort to provide only temporary happiness before we return to baseline dissatisfaction. This happens because external achievements can't fill the void left by abandoned authentic aspirations. Franz Kafka understood this perfectly. He spent his days working in insurance, his nights writing stories that wouldn't be published until after his death. He never found external success, but he wrote because he had to, because his authentic self demanded expression. Kafka chose the courage to be misunderstood rather than the comfort of being accepted for someone he wasn't. The research is clear. People who live in alignment with their authentic values experience significantly better mental health, stronger relationships, and greater life satisfaction. But most people don't even remember what their authentic values are anymore. Your recurring nightmares about being trapped, chased, or powerless aren't random. They're your psyche's way of showing you the gap between who you are and who you were meant to be. The faceless pursuer in your dreams isn't an external threat. It's the life you're living, chasing away the life you were meant to live. So how do we break free from this pattern? How do we honor our childhood dreams without being naive about adult realities? Nietzsche provided a roadmap through two key concepts, amor fati and self-overcoming. But first, understand this. Freud saw dreams as wish fulfillment. Jung saw them as messages from the unconscious. Both were building on Nietzsche's insight that our sleeping mind preserves our deepest truths. Your dreams aren't just random neural firing. They're archaeological evidence of who you really are. We must practice what I call dream archaeology. systematically uncovering the authentic drives buried under years of social conditioning. This isn't about literally pursuing your childhood fantasy of being a firefighter. It's about identifying the core value that fantasy represented, perhaps service, courage, or protection, and finding ways to express it in your current life. Take 15 minutes this week to write down 3 childhood dreams or aspirations you remember having. Don't judge them as realistic or unrealistic. Then, for each dream, ask yourself, what core drive or value was this expressing? The child who wanted to be a teacher might have been expressing a love of learning and sharing knowledge. The child who wanted to be a veterinarian might have been expressing deep empathy and a desire to heal. Here's the key insight. Your 6-year-old self didn't want fame. They wanted to feel significant. They didn't want riches. They wanted freedom. Reconnect with the feeling, not the fantasy. Once you've identified these core drives, ask yourself, how can I honor this drive in my current life? The key is integration, not abandonment. You don't need to quit your job to honor your authentic self. You need to find ways to express your core drives within the context of your adult responsibilities. The executive who rediscovers their teaching drive might start mentoring junior colleagues or volunteering to train new employees. The accountant who rediscovers their musical drive might join a community choir or take up an instrument again, not for career success but for the joy of creative expression. We must practice amor fati, embracing everything that has happened to us, including the pain of compromise and the difficulty of authentic living. This doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means taking responsibility for becoming who we're meant to be, even when it's challenging. This might mean having difficult conversations with family members who expect you to maintain certain roles. It might mean making career changes that involve short-term sacrifice for long-term alignment. It might mean facing the fear of being judged by others who are too frightened to pursue their own authenticity. We must engage in ongoing self-overcoming, the continuous process of becoming more authentic versions of ourselves. Nietzsche warned us, he who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. The monsters we fight aren't external. They're the voices in our head that tell us to play it safe, to conform, to abandon our dreams. What does this look like on a Tuesday? It might mean speaking up in a meeting when you have a different perspective, even if it's uncomfortable. It might mean spending your lunch break reading poetry instead of scrolling social media, because your authentic self craves beauty and meaning. It might mean saying no to social obligations that drain your energy so you can say yes to activities that align with your values. The goal isn't to become a different person, it's to become more fully yourself. It's to integrate the wisdom of your childhood dreams with the skills and resources of your adult life. When you begin this integration process, something remarkable happens. Your relationship with both your sleeping dreams and your life aspirations begins to shift. Instead of nightmares about being trapped, you might start having dreams about breaking free and exploring new territories. Instead of dreams about being chased, you might start having dreams about facing challenges with courage. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always comfortable. Nietzsche understood that authentic living requires what he called self-overcoming, the courage to face uncertainty, criticism, and the possibility of failure. But he also understood that this is the only path to genuine fulfillment. The beautiful truth is that your childhood dreams are still alive within you, preserved like seeds that can still grow if given the right conditions. Every time you honor them, even in small ways, you water those seeds. Every time you choose authenticity over conformity, you move closer to the person you were meant to be. Your childhood dreams didn't become nightmares because they were impossible. They became nightmares because you stopped believing in the values they represented. But it's not too late to remember who you really are. It's not too late to let your authentic self guide you toward a life that honors both your deepest aspirations and your adult responsibilities. Let me leave you with a thought that should both terrify and inspire you. One day, you'll be old, or maybe not even get that privilege. When that moment comes, what do you want to remember? That you pleased the crowd, or that you honored the strange, beautiful voice inside you? Don't let your childhood dreams become tombstones of what might have been. The world is already full of people who've forgotten who they are. It doesn't need one more. The question isn't whether you can achieve your childhood dreams exactly as you imagined them. The question is whether you have the courage to let them guide you toward authentic living. Because the alternative isn't safe living, it's sleepwalking through the only life you'll ever have. As Nietzsche wrote, become who you are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expects you to be, not who you think you should be, who you are. If this has awakened something in you, if it stirred memories of dreams you thought were lost forever, then you're ready to begin the journey back to your authentic self. The path isn't easy, but it's the only path that leads to genuine fulfillment. I want to hear about your childhood dreams and the core values they represented. What did you dream of becoming when you were young? What core drive was that dream expressing? How might you honor that drive in your current life? Share your insights in the comments below. You might inspire someone else to rediscover their own authentic path. If you're ready to explore these ideas further, to dive deeper into the psychology of authentic living, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every like tells the algorithm that these conversations about meaning and authenticity deserve to be heard. Every subscription creates a community of people who refuse to accept sleepwalking as a way of life. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their childhood dreams. Share it with someone who's been going through the motions, who's forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely excited about their life, who needs to be reminded that their authentic self is still alive and waiting to be honored, because the world needs more people who have the courage to live authentically. The world needs more people who remember that their childhood dreams weren't just fantasies. They were expressions of their deepest values and capabilities. The world needs more people who understand that becoming who you really are isn't selfish. It's the greatest gift you can give to yourself and others. Your authentic self is calling. The only question is, are you ready to answer?